Maintenant, à l'autre côté, c'est bien. À l'autre côté.
My family's past history has no link with Reunion Island, but right from my first journey here 20 years ago, I put down roots that have grown deeper and deeper. My own ancestors were also persecuted and forced to leave their Spanish homeland. With this exhibition, I hope to give them faces they would have been proud of, and a dignified place in society where they have long since been forgotten, discreet into death. The symbolic link between woman and the garden can be found in all civilizations, and in the gardens of the Historical Museum this becomes very real. Here it was a woman, Ombline des Bassins, who commanded other women, her slaves, in their work as digger or gardener. It's thanks to these women who only left a very bare trace that we can enjoy today the heritage, the fruits of their labour. And what about women today? We can no longer see them working on the land or even pruning the rose bushes in the gardens of the estate. When I read Madame des Bassins' will and testament, I chose a certain number of women who were mentioned in the testament and whose names evoked either faces or scenes, and some of them were extremely poetic, some of these names, and quite out of place when you think of the hardships of slavery, like Venus, whom we know as the goddess of beauty and love, and who symbolizes the star that accompanies the moon and the sun. And to think that there was a slave who was handicapped as well. We don't know whether she was physically handicapped or mentally handicapped, but she was handicapped, and she looked after 3 children, one of her own and 2 who were her sister's children. And she was named, her job was named négresse de cour, and nigger in the courtyard, really, if I translate it literally, which just means that she must have worked in around the house, in the courtyard perhaps. There are quite a few self-portraits in this exhibition. Just because it was very handy, I had myself as a model, and it was easier than trying to find somebody else when I just was looking for an expression in the slave woman's eyes. So I tried to imagine that I was that woman and imagine what she was feeling, and so I quite pitilessly drew myself, but changing the features so that they would be more African, and putting that suffering in the person's eyes. And so I wasn't really drawing myself, I was drawing the actual slave woman. I've observed African faces quite a lot, and in fact have drawn some, and seen how differently the shape of the lips and the jaw is from European ones. So when I was doing self-portraits, I would try to develop the face in a more African way. I don't know whether it was always very successful, but that's what I set out to do anyway. So even though I was looking at myself in the mirror, at the same time I was trying to change the features. And afterwards there's another stage when I paint the face later on, after sticking it onto a background and model it more, and then in fact the self part of the portrait is completely lost by then. It doesn't look at all like me in the end. It was when I was looking through all these old documents that I came across the very well known lithography here by Antoine Roussin of the actual estate. There's a lithography which shows the domain with the sugarcane factory in the background and a few people in the foreground. And that gave me the idea of taking this drawing and reproducing it as it was done at that time, but to add what I now see as I look at the sky, either when I walk in the gardens of the estate or when I look at the sky from where I live, which is very close by. That way I would recreate life and movement which no longer exist in the drawing that was done at the time. So there again, another way of taking you back into that period so that you're transported into the atmosphere of the estate at the time of Madame de Bessin. After the historical research and botanical research to discover how the garden of the domain evolved throughout the centuries, over the centuries, I had to research into how I was going to do these portraits in a way that would be contemporary, so using a contemporary technique, but in staying faithful to drawing, which of course is a more old-fashioned technique nowadays. But I wanted to do the drawings. I wanted to do these portraits in a very representational way, and using tissue paper was a way that I discovered was perfect for this, because it was fragile. When you screw it up and stick it to the support, you have age lines, you have an impression of time passing, and so in a way that it was really the perfect technique. And I coloured the white tissue paper with coffee for the first part, for this historical part of the exhibition, because the women I was drawing actually worked with coffee. They worked in the plantations and picked the coffee and carried it in baskets on their head. So I thought it was quite apt to use the coffee itself to tint the paper. For the background, I used all sorts of other papers. Sometimes I used canvas, and sometimes I used papers that came from different sources, from India, from Nepal, from even one paper that was made by school children at Villèle itself. The series of shadows of women that I painted on wooden shingles. This was inspired by a little house that's next to the main dwelling on the domain, and this little house is now, at present day, covered with these same wooden shingles. And one day I was walking past and there was a beautiful sunlit afternoon with shadows of the trees on the shingles, and a woman went past and her shadow was cast on the wall as well. And I could then imagine that in the times when the slaves were walking past these houses, carrying baskets of linen or of coffee that they were carrying, or water that they brought up. And I could imagine that the shadows of these women would be cast on the walls in the same way. I tried to create a rhythm in the way that I set these shingles out on the board, and you have one woman picking coffee, for instance, and then she's stooping to pick up a heavy basket and then carrying it on her head, and then resting her back a little. And sometimes you see a profile of a woman just taking her breath, and just from her profile you can see that she's tired, and then she carries on, stooping, carrying, working, washing the linen.
Lorsque j'ai voulu peindre Geneviève, la porteuse de mémoire, j'ai voulu représenter une femme qui portait un poids, le poids de la canne et le poids de la mémoire. Et pour cela, j'ai voulu imaginer comment pouvait être une femme qui portait un poids, comment étaient ses bras, ses épaules, la tête. Et le premier dessin a été celui-là. Déjà, il avait un certain regard. Mais très vite, je me suis rendu compte qu'elle n'avait pas l'air de porter, vraiment. Ce n'était pas la bonne position. Et donc, je me suis penché la tête pour mieux imaginer le poids de la canne sur la tête.
Au fil des années, ces lieux me sont devenus très familiers. Il n'y a qu'une ravine qui sépare mon atelier de la Chapelle Pointue et du musée de Villèle. Je me suis laissée imprégner peu à peu par la couleur de ses jardins, par sa lumière, et son histoire si présente. Aujourd'hui, je mesure à quel point j'ai été happée par ces femmes et leur histoire.